Coming up on Mountain News at 5:30, workers are calling for higher wages and stricter guidance on disruptive phone calls at a London call center. And the Federal Open Market Committee will kick off a two-day meeting to try and manage inflation, but could it lead to an increased risk of a recession?
Plus, we've got a little bit of rain on the way for the middle of the week, but that's not the big story. The breakdown is coming up as Mountain News at 5:30 starts now.
Dedicated to Southern and Eastern Kentucky, this is WYMT Mountain News at 5:30.
Good evening, I'm Steve Hensley. Southern Kentucky workers went on strike this morning, saying they want longer breaks and more pay. One worker talked with WYMT's Dakota Makris, who says their demands will ultimately help their customers in the long run.
Maximus call center workers in London are wanting higher pay, more time off in between calls, and clear policies that protect them from abusive calls.
In this instance, our contract is to mostly go ahead and work for the Affordable Care Act, known as the Health Insurance Marketplace, as well as the Medicare program, mostly acting as customer service.
Workers across the country at Maximus call centers went on strike. Workers say they see an increase in callers when open enrollment begins for the Affordable Care Act, which starts Tuesday, adding to their workload, saying they want to go from making $15 an hour to $25 an hour.
Like I said, versus most other federal contractors, we're working pretty low below the bar. It's definitely a concern about, just a living wage and just better respect in this case.
Call center staff say some callers are frustrated when they call in, taking it out on workers. Workers say they want to see Maximus have clearer policies on disruptive phone calls so they can better serve their callers.
Also knowing that, we'll have year-round the proper food and shelter and things that we may need, because, of course, rent is up, housing issues are a major concern for a lot of people. It's tough all over.
Hoping to see a change within their workplace. In London, Dakota Makris, WYMT Mountain News.
A company spokesperson says if their workers receive an inappropriate phone call, they are allowed to end the call. We have Maximus's statement on WYMT.com.
Well, clouds have been the big story as we went through yesterday, much of today, and it looks like we'll see the same thing into tomorrow, but a little bit of relief there once we get that full image to load from our camera at UVA Wise. Yeah, a little blue sky out there as we near sunset. 55 the current reading. And one of our Southwest Virginia spots. You see a few of those clouds, though, trying to push back in after the pattern from yesterday really starts to move out. So we're not completely done with the potential for some, cloudy skies as we head into tonight and tomorrow. And I can't even rule out the possibility for some sprinkles during the day tomorrow as well. We fall through the 50s as we head into tonight. You see those partly cloudy skies turning mostly cloudy. By the time we get past midnight, we're in those lower 50s, and eventually some of us will be falling into the upper 40s as we head into the overnight. But I'll have the latest on when those temperatures really start to bump back up and when we could see some breezy conditions and the return of sunshine as well. That's in a few minutes. Steve?
Evan, thanks. History has shown where a voter lives is a major factor in determining who they might vote for. Recently, voters in rural counties have supported more conservative candidates, while voters in urban areas have backed liberal ones. And now the two main political parties claim they are making inroads to attract voters from the other's base. WYMT's Washington News Bureau reporter Josh Roltenberg sees how much ground they have gained.
Former President Donald Trump helped Republicans capture the vote in rural counties in the last two presidential elections. Republicans claim the party will see even more support after speaking with tens of millions of voters in cities across America where Democratic voters typically live.
RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel has emphasized in building a coalition of volunteers that go out and go door to door and talk to their neighbors about what concerns them and to bring the message of our candidates across the country.
On the flip side, Democrats say they have made a compelling case over the last year and a half to not just inner city voters, but rural Americans as well, that they are the ones coming through for them.
It is Democrats, after 4 years of promised infrastructure weeks, that are going to deliver rural broadband. We have a Democratic Party that, with the Inflation Reduction Act, is going to increase subsidies for healthcare that is critical for rural communities.
Bill Galston from the Brookings Institution is not buying the party's claims because he says time and money are limited resources.
In many cases, reasonable candidates, reasonable campaigns will decide that they really don't have the luxury of spending $5 to get an additional vote in the other guy's base, when for $2.50 or even $1, you have a better chance of getting a vote from swing voters or mobilizing your own voters to show up.
And Galston thinks the midterms will be won in the suburbs.
If you're asking me what the two parties are doing to try to appeal to the swing groups like suburbanites, like moderates, like independents, like Hispanics, the answer is a lot. And the election will, I think, be determined by the relative success of the messages and the organizing efforts among those swing groups in the population.
Now, the Brookings Institution's research shows Democrats retook the House in 2018 and the presidency in 2020 because of increased support in the suburbs. However, Galston says the margins are too small to believe that Democrats will hold on to the House. He says the Senate is more of a toss-up. In Washington, I'm Josh Rotenberg.
Inflation is not just hitting home buyers and people with credit card debt. Uncle Sam is getting squeezed by higher borrowing costs, too. The cost to finance America's growing mountain of debt is rising rapidly as the Federal Reserve scrambles to put out the inflation fire by raising interest rates. So let's break down the numbers. This year alone, the federal government spent $475 billion in interest, more than $120 billion over last year. Now, if things keep up this way, financial analysts worry by 2025 or 26, the United States may end up paying more in federal interest payments than on the country's entire defense budget, which was $767 billion this year. The federal government is expected to use a tool that will help curb inflation, but some worry it could increase the risk of a recession. WYMT's Washington News Bureau reporter Brendan Cullerton shares how the Federal Reserve is planning to increase interest rates.
The Federal Open Market Committee is kicking off a two-day meeting where officials will try to manage the worst inflation the U.S. has seen in decades. The Fed has been expected to increase interest rates by 0.75 of a point, which would be its fourth straight increase. There has been recent speculation the increase could be only half a point. Those increases make it more expensive to borrow money for things like cars and homes, but there is concern continued increases could hurt the economy. This comes as the White House says a recent GDP report showed job growth and a potential decrease in consumer prices.
Some slowing in the pace of inflation, which was also a welcome sign. Still too elevated, no question, but some cracks in that wall moving in the right direction.
This actual rate hike would take place in December, but the Fed's decision would likely impact markets immediately. Reporting in Washington, I'm Brendan Cullerton.
Coming up on Mountain News at 5:30, overdraft fees can be an unwelcome surprise when it comes to your checking account. Some simple strategies to avoid the dreaded charge.
Plus, showers moving in tomorrow, at least in some number, but it won't be enough rain to stop that wildfire threat later this week. Latest on that coming up after this.